from Jaipur, Dr. Kumar Doctor from Mumbai, Dr. H.M. Ravindranath from Davangere in Karnataka, and Dr. Shamant Shetty from Mangalore. Today's moderator will be Dr. Shamant Shetty. Dr. Shamant Shetty is a consultant and phaco and refractive services at Prasad Netralaya in Udupi. He has done his MS ophthalmology from Davangere, and he did his fellowship in phacoemulsification from Prasad Netralaya in Udupi itself. He has worked in more than 1,000 eye camps, which the Prasad Netralaya has done, and he has been a phaco and refractive trainer for the Carl Zeiss program and for the Prasad Netralaya training program that he undertakes. I would like to request Dr. Shamant Shetty to please introduce the faculty for today. Dr. Shamant. Can you hear me?
Samant, we are not able to hear you.
Samant sir, your voice is not audible. Please check your mic.
Are you on mute or something? Can you hear me?
यूपीपी डाउनलोड कहाँ पे है?
डेस्कटॉप पे।
किस नाम से?
ये ऑनर्स 50।
Dr. Virendra Agarwal.
Hello.
Samant. Samant now.
Hello.
Samant, we can hear you.
Hello.
Samant, can you hear us?
No, I can hear you. Hello.
Okay.
So I have done the primary intro. Now you need to introduce Dr. Virendra Agarwal.
Yeah. Hello. Warm welcome to everyone. So we'll start with the first speaker, Dr. Virendra Agarwal. Agarwal sir is the Joint Secretary of IMA Rajasthan. He's been a past member of the Scientific Committee of All India of the AIOS. So he's an alumni of the AIMS with a gold medal. Sir has an expert field in refractive surgery, and he's one of the pioneers to start LASIK in 1999. He's moved on to femtocataract with SMILE, and he's got large series of C3R treatment to his back. Sir is also a fake trainer. He's received a gold medal from IRSI and again a distinguished service from the APO in Singapore. So we'll start with Agarwal sir's topic. So after sir's topic is done, then we'll take the questions.
Dr. Virendra is speaking on cataract surgery in recurrent uveitis.
So Sajay, I will now share my screen.
Yes, please.
And thank you for this opportunity and to be part of this program. And I'll be happy that if I can do justice with what your expectations are. The topic given to me for postgraduates is a cataract surgery in recurrent or chronic uveitis. And as we all know, that the uveitis is a very common thing in a practice, and there are many patients who come with the cataract with the uveitis, maybe because of uveitis or maybe with the uveitis. But just for PGs, I would like to ask one question, because nowadays they always see whenever we do cataract surgery, we implant an IOL. I will ask the PGs to jot down in somewhere or do this thing, answer in this question in their chat box. And in which case we may not put IOL out of the 4 questions: the Fuchs iridocyclitis, Behçet's uveitis, juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, related uveitis and cataract, toxoplasmosis, in which we are going to do a cataract surgery, but we may not have a choice or we may opt not to put IOL. So this kind of thing is just to start their mind, that they should start thinking that the cataract surgery, though we do all time with the IOL implantation, but sometimes we don't implant IOL. And the question is this. The answer is simple, and I think everybody is aware about it. It's a juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. There is no dispute in this, but rest of the questions may have a controversy, as uveitis have a controversy in many situations. You all know the cataract caused by uveitis or related with the uveitis is called as complicated cataract. And it is not only a complicated by means that, as usually we say, whenever cataract is due to some ocular disorder or a primary disease of the eye itself which causes cataract. But this kind of cataract have too many difficulties in management, and that's why also it is a complicated. But the scientific term is a complicated cataract because of uveitis. It is more common in the cases where there is a chronicity of the uveitis or where there are recurrent attacks. The etiology may be a primary inflammation itself within the eye, or may be related to the steroid use which we use for treatment of the disease. So it is difficult to find out that which kind of cataract it is, but by a typical steroid-induced cataract appearance you can know. But majority of patients, they have a cataract which is not very clearly defined that it is steroid-induced, but mainly a posterior subcapsular to start with. But sometimes patient comes with a already closed pupil, or the pupil is too small to define the details of the cataract. But whenever cataract is there, you all know the answer is only surgery. But in uveitis, there are few important indications where we should do surgery, where we should wait, or where we should do early surgery. So whenever cataract is visually significant, means it is causing mainly the vision loss is because of cataract, you definitely need to do a cataract surgery. But sometime for the assessment of the posterior segment, for diagnostic purpose, management purpose, or sometime for a surgical treatment for a posterior segment disease, you need to do a cataract surgery in case of uveitis, though it may not be a primary cause for loss of vision. And if it is there in embryopygenic age, in children, then you need to do a early surgery, because early surgery can prevent the amblyopia development and have very big help in treatment of it. There are some contraindications for uveitic cataract, except the phacogenic is the reason, means lens itself is the reason for inflammation. We should avoid the surgery in active inflammation, particularly in the anterior segment. So whenever there is an anterior uveitis, we avoid cataract surgery. But if it is a lens-induced inflammation, then we will do surgery, early surgery or immediate surgery, because that is the only answer for that kind of inflammation treatment. Whenever there is a other disease, as I said, then you expect that the surgery is not going to result in the good recovery of the vision, mainly because of retinal problems or optic nerve related problems. Then cataract surgery can be delayed or may not be done, because cataract surgery is not simple in uveitic patients, and sometimes it causes more complications than benefit. And whenever there is an active surface infection, we avoid all surgeries, and particularly in uveitis, it should be definitely avoided, because they usually require more steroids than a normal course. Whenever there is a coexisting conditions which are common with uveitis, particularly glaucoma, hypotony, macular edema, retinal choroidal or other optic nerve involvements, you should be very cautious about doing the surgeries, when to do, how to do, and more important, to explain the prognosis, which will come in the detail also. There are many factors which complicate the cataract surgery in uveitis situations. Mainly it is because of posterior synechiae. This pupil is still good enough. Sometimes the pupillary synechiae, post-synechiae are so much that the pupil, you can't visualize pupil or you can't differentiate between that where the boundary of iris is. The membranes are very thick. There are many membranes over the pupil which is covering the iris also. The pupillar dilation is poor, may not be sufficient, may not be achievable, and whenever you try to do a pupillar dilation, there can be some other issues. Even bleeding is there from the iris. Epilenticular membrane, as I was saying, may be covering only the lens, may be covering the pupillary surface, and sometimes it is covering all over the iris also, and you are not able to see the pupil margins detail. The cataracts are usually wide, hypermature, may not be mature, but sometimes the cataracts are commonly are there in the posterior pole. To start with, the pupil is small and they are getting dense and dense in the center, and because of the denser cataracts in the central area or visual axis, they may be affecting vision much more significantly, and these capsules may have opacity at the end of the cataract surgery also, and may not have a visual recovery just by cataract surgery. So you may require a membranectomy or capsulotomy, which is much more common in these cases. There are many other factors which complicate the cataract surgery, particularly the BSK. Sometimes the BSK can be very severe and you are not able to see the central area or the pupil is covered. The iris, which is very fragile, which is not having a normal architecture, normal structure, normal placement, and it is adhered, and because of adherence in the center, periphery, or irregularity, there can be shallow AC, iris bombay. Usually these are chronic inflammations, so they have a hypotony, or they might have undergone a previous glaucoma surgery or VR surgeries. Usually the zonules are very weak, or there can be a zonodialysis also. The iris vessels sometimes bleed just by a center, only entry into the anterior chamber, and during block also they can bleed. And sometimes these patients are associated with the abnormal body postures, kyphoscoliosis or some other issues, and the patient may not be able to lie down on a table in a normal position, and because of this also the surgery becomes very difficult. The patient is not comfortable, surgeon is not comfortable, and sometimes neck is so stiff that you cannot make the eye horizontal parallel to the floor or the table. Preoperative evaluation is related with the many machines. We are lucky to have imaging tools. Most important is the OCT, fundus angiography in some patients may be of help, may be possible, but many times the FFA is not possible. But B scan is a kind of must in majority of the uveitic patients, because the pupil dilation is not good. You are not able to see the periphery, and UBM particularly, though it is not a commonly available tool, but in chronic uveitis patients, sometimes you can see the ciliary body status, and you can see a ciliary body membrane is there, which can be diagnosed by UBM, but the USG B scan is not able to diagnose it. And I prefer to do a biometry in case whenever I see a uveitic patient, even the cataract is slightest, and I'm not planning to do surgery in a near future, but I do a optical biometry because that is possible at that time, and later on it may not be possible. So that way we have some tool available. And this question 2, which is there in the poll, is a very controversial. The answer is also controversial, but I am putting it just for the PGs. There are many important things in uveitic cataract. OCT is having importance in particular situations because sometimes the edema is there, which can be picked up by OCT, but you are not able to see by a direct or indirect ophthalmoscopy or 90-day examinations. B scan is of a big help when there is a RD or some other issues. Even when there is a dense vitritis, which can be picked up by USG B scan. FFA, whenever possible, can give you idea of the circulation status. And vision assessment. In vision assessment, I would like to say that vision assessment is not by that what is the vision, what is the potential of vision, what is the possibility of recovery of vision, what is the amount of vision lost because of uveitis, what is the amount of vision lost because of cataract. It is difficult to differentiate between the vision potential and the amount of vision caused loss by a different structure, maybe optic nerve, maybe retinal edema, macular edema, maybe because of cataract, maybe related issues in which the cornea is compromised. So dry eyes also again need to be assessed in these patients because of chronic use of steroids. Some corneas are not very good. So my important thing, take home thing is that these things are very, very important. But for practical purpose, means when you want to give prognosis to the patient, I would like to say the vision assessment scores over other investigations or other reasons for diagnosis and help in diagnosis. The preoperative counseling in uveitic patient is much more important than a normal case. What is the reason that we want to do surgery? It is for the visual gain or for a non-visual gain. That should be very clear in patient mind, because whenever we do cataract surgery, patient feels that vision is going to improve. But sometimes we are doing a cataract surgery just for the proper assessment and planning and management of posterior segment. Suppose there is a posterior segment inflammation much more than the anterior segment, and it is causing cataract, and cataract is not allowing us to assess the posterior segment. And that is why we are not able to treat also efficiently, and the cataract surgery is planned for that reason. If patient is not aware, they will blame you later on, and there can be some legal issues also. So prognosis should be understood by the patient, the reason for surgery should be understood, and these patients require very long and repetitive follow-up. So that should be told that you will require a repetitive follow-up or continuous follow-up, and sometimes they feel that because you have done surgery, the follow-up for lifelong is free. So that should be made very clear in uveitis, because they will require a lot of follow-ups, lot of investigations later on also. So they will be charged separately, and if you can make a note of it into the consent itself, it will be very good. The increased chances of other procedures related to the complications in which the macular edema may be requiring a treatment, the membranes or the tractions may require surgery. These should be explained separately, that they are not along with the cataract. Sometimes we do combined surgeries, but they should be charged separately, and they should be explained separately that the need may be there now or later. And the medication is very long. As I said, the patients are inflammatory, so the inflammation need to be controlled, and the recurrence is there. So because of the recurrence also, you require to do a treatment. In general principles, before doing surgery, what we need to follow is that the eye should be quiet for 3 months at least. There are few people who prefer to do a keep quiet eye for 3 months to 6 months. There are few ones who agree that they should be off medicine minimum for 3 months and then you plan surgery. But practically we know it is not always possible to keep the eyes off medicine and the uveitis remain quiet. So I will change for it myself that you may be having medicines. Medicines are maintaining the eye quiet at least for 3 months, then you can do a surgery. And if eye is not maintained quiet, the surgery may have a very severe inflammation post-op period, and which will be difficult to manage, or it may be having some complications or side effects. So because of that, patient expectation should be very clear in that sense also. And otherwise, for safety, we should make the uveitis very well controlled at least for 3 months before planning for surgery, because cataract surgery is a big event in inflamed eye. And if you can diagnose, or if you know that the macular edema is already there in these eyes, that should be treated before surgery or simultaneously. Sometimes these macular edemas are not responding to topical medication. You can give posterior subtenon steroids, or you can give intravitreal steroids. Now we have Ozurdex, which is a big help. There is no financial interest into this, but this is a big help. And these other steroids implantable are not available in India, but Ozurdex is freely available. We need to treat the anterior segment inflammation, which is very clearly visible. Sometimes we can see the posterior segment inflammation cells of vitreitis is visible, then you should treat that also. Or otherwise, if you are finding any other suggestive things, as I said in the beginning, the lot of vitreitis can be diagnosed by ultrasound also, because ultrasound will not be kind of a normal, it will be an echoes, very subtle kind of echoes, but the echoes are there. And when you give steroids, they try to reduce in density, and that is how you can judge that vitreitis is getting treated. Preoperative, perioperative, and steroids definitely needed, and most of the patients we need to give systemic steroid treatment along we take it for the surgery. What I mean is that when you are planning for a surgery, it is not like other cataracts in which you can do a surgery next day itself or the same day sometime. But uveitic patient need to be planned. You need to give dates, and you require to start topical and usually the oral steroids before surgery. This depends on 2 to 5 days or 7 days, depending on the severity of the inflammation you presume on patient had before. If the uveitis was very, very severe and you have made it controlled and now 3-4 months have passed, then you plan for surgery, then you definitely start systemic steroids in a higher dose. If the uveitis was mild, then you may start steroids just 2 days before also. And if uveitis was like a Fuchs, then you may not start systemic steroids. Again, I would like to emphasize preoperative, intraoperative, postoperative inflammation need to be controlled. And preoperative and postoperative is a treatment by medicines, and intraoperative is a manipulation. So you should have a minimum manipulation that is of a big help not to incite too much of inflammation. And very big help now we have the viscoelastic devices. All kind of surgeries need it, but for uveitis, these are very, very important and they work actually like a tool. This I will show in my surgery also. Iris hooks and pupillary expansion ring or some other means you need or you may need for effective, adequate pupillary dilation. Trypan blue is a very, very big help, and preferably it should be used in majority of the patients, even if the kind of capsule you feel their glow is enough to help you in doing the Rexis, but I will advise to use Trypan blue in almost all cases. You should have a fine instruments like Rexis forceps and micro scissors for help, because in uveitic cataracts the capsule may not be very easily managed by 26 gauge needle, and you may require help of these instruments, and they are of big help to achieve a proper adequate size Rexis. Sometimes they can be used to release synechia, sometimes they can be used to tear off rather than just the way we do Rexis, and sometimes you require to pull them. There are fibrotic bands over the capsules, there can be membrane over the capsules, there can be calcification. So these instruments are of big help. Capsular tension rings, as I said, the patients usually jonules are compromised. You may require capsular tension rings or segments during the surgery, so they should be handy, they should be readily available in your theater, and you should have access to vitrectomy, because some patients may require vitrectomy on table. Maybe because of the capsular tear, capsular rent, or maybe that you are not able to see very clear glows and you would like to do a core vitrectomy to assess a primary surgery. Cataract along with primary surgery you can do. I prefer to do a pars plana vitrectomy in all these patients, though I do only core vitrectomy or anti-vitrectomy by that approach, but that is keeping the eye much more quiet, and it is having a more effective vitrectomy than anti-vitrectomy, because you can clear all around the pupillary area through pars plana, but when you go through a limbal area, you leave some windows which are behind the pupil or behind the entry point. Though we can do by bimanual technique much more clarity, but still I prefer, and pars plana route is not very difficult. And nowadays with the trocar, it has become very self-sealing entry. It's easy to enter in the posterior route, and there is a guide where to enter, how to enter. It should be learned by all PGs. The intraoperative considerations, I prefer to use a clear corneal wound, not the square wound. Sometimes there is a scleritis also, that also is a problem, and clear corneal wounds, leave it for some inflammation if it is there, and you may require a trabeculectomy or some kind of thing later on, so the conjunctiva is untouched. Removal of pupillary membrane is kind of must to achieve effective pupillary dilation. Synecholysis, again I said, isn't required, and this can be done by visco-assisted also, or there are some people who prefer to do a peripheral iridectomy, and through peripheral iridectomy they achieve synecholysis by passing an instrument between the iris and the lens. The pupillary expansion can be done by stretching, by iris hooks. Expansion rings can be used. You can use Sinskey or Coughlin hook, whichever is available with you or you are comfortable. Ideally, we should achieve a largest possible Rexis, not beyond 6, but what I mean largest possible means, because the pupil are small, you should not have a very small Rexis, because later on they will develop phimosis. These are inflamed eyes, phimosis is very common. So if your Rexis is small, the chances of phimosis are much more. And when there is a severe phimosis, the many things you want to do a posterior segment examination, management, vision can be a problem. And particularly the phimosis, the Rexis may not be centered, the phimosis may come in a visual axis also. Meticulous cortical cleanup is must in all patients to prevent PCO, but particularly in uveitis patient, not only for PCO, for preventing or minimizing the inflammation. Also, the cortical cleanup need to be very meticulous. In the bag IOL is essential. If you feel that because of some reason you are not able to put in the bag IOL, preferably avoid putting IOL in a primary setting. Though I know if it is not possible to do a bag IOL in the bag IOL in the primary setting, it will not be possible in a secondary surgery. But try to achieve in bag IOL implantation in primary case. That is the only thing. AC IOL is a big no. You can do a sutured IOL or a glued IOL or posterior segment IOL, like what you say, Yamane technique or some other technique. That is preferable, but not for the beginners. It is having much more inflammation than normal case, and it may be a fault. You may require to give intravitreal triamcinolone or Ozurdex in some patients because of the primary condition. You know that there is already a lot of inflammation in the posterior segment, or you may require to plan when you are done surgery and you seen the posterior segment is not good and there is a lot of mug in the vitreous, then you can choose to put it. So you should have this also on the table available. Conjunctiva, as I said, that I would like to not touch much and I would like to keep it safe for if required a glaucoma surgery or some other surgery later on, and avoid scleral touch, particularly in scleritis, because scleromalacia or necrosis can happen and there can be a problem, perforations will be there. So intraoperative consideration, as I said before also, that you require OVDs, and this is a big tool, and I will show you how the OVD can be used. Iris spatula or Sinskey or like Coughlin hook can be used. You can pass the instrument through PI, but I would like to just show you how the viscoelastic can be used. I have made a side port and now I'm just injecting visco at the pupillary edge and trying to dissect, and after dissection with the blunt cannula side, I'm just further dissecting it. And by doing gentle visco dissection and just by a mechanical slight pushing, this case I am going to show you in the next slide also, where how much big pupil can be achieved just by this. The intraoperative consideration, like the stretching I said, I will show you how the stretching can be done. And we can use iris hooks also. So I am showing two videos. This is just a separation by hooks. You stretch the pupillary edge. Though we prefer to have a more than 5 millimeter pupil, but for me, I feel 4 millimeter is enough in such patients, and I avoid using other iris hooks or expansion devices if the pupil is around 4 millimeter or so. But if it is not so, then we can use iris hooks or this thing. Iris hooks we would not prefer to stretch too much, and you can achieve this kind of a rectangular opening or you can achieve a quadrangular opening, just for the choice what you want to do. But minimal stretching, why I am saying so, because if you have too much of the stretching of the iris, the sphincter tear, the pupil will remain at that place only, and maybe a too big pupil which was very small, and now patient can have a photophobia. So we don't want to have photophobia, that also is an issue. Again, as I said, viscoelastic, this particular is young, she is having a backpack, too much.
आपका वॉइस नहीं आ रहा है.
And as you can see that I am trying to create
Virendra, your voice is not coming.
Uh,
Can you hear me now?
Video screen. Yes, now it's better.
Now it's better. Okay, sorry. Probably there was a music, so it was difficult. Hello, Kumar, can you hear me now?
now we can hear.
Yes, sir. Yes, yes.
Thank you. So now you can see the edge of the rhexis is visible and which is behind the pupil. You can see I achieved the big enough rhexis which is around 5.5 plus, and I am doing a meticulous cleaning of the bag and the posterior capsule, and now the lens is implanted. And this case required a toric lens because the cylinder was 2.75 on the corner plane. So we planned for a toric lens. I have access to Callisto, so I use the Callisto for placement. And right now the pupil is not that much, but is slightly smaller. So for exact placement of the toricity, the patient is under topical anesthesia. So I ask the patient to look at the site where I want to implant, and just by manipulation I can see that it is almost on the same axis. And then I ask the patient to look up and down, so I could achieve. The hydro, she is very young, so it is looking very big hydro, but this is kind of a must because these patients, they usually, the stromal hydration or edema effects goes very easily because of the good endothelial cells. So I just asked her to look on the axis where the IOL placement is there, and I could see that it is in the place. So these kind of things can be done in uveitic cataracts, and uveitic cataract need to be managed meticulously. All can be done by everyone, but until you are sure about that you are going to achieve good results, wait and watch. You can take help from seniors or from the people who are doing these kind of cataracts. But I'm saying not to be disheartened. All PGs after practice, coming into practice, they can do it, but be sure that you have all the things, armamentarium available with you to achieve good results. And good results are possible by microsurgery, good IOLs, and good techniques. There are point of questions. The patient may have a hypotony, patients may have a exaggerated inflammation, and because of this, you may require management for a longer period. There are some issues in uveitis, particularly the pigmentation or deposits on the IOL, which can be cleaned. Can you hear me, Kumar?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, sorry. So there could be a pigmentation on the lens which can be cleaned by YAG, and particularly for the pigment deposition on the anterior surfaces, I prefer to use a YAG capsulotomy. I have Zeiss machine, no financial reasons, but they have an anterior offset and the posterior offset focus. So by using anterior offset focus and a very low energy 0.5 joules, I can put spot on the pigment itself, and just by that it disrupts or it gets dislodged from the IOL surface, and the IOL gets cleaner, and this reduces the glare in many of the patients. There can be a cyclitic membrane, there can be dense PCOs, there can be capsular fibrosis. In capsular fibrosis, also the same technique with slightly higher energy you can use, and you can, what you can say, interrupt the rhexis margins. You can make a cross or some other kind of things, so the fibrosis gets reduced. And whenever there is a severe membrane around the iris, you may require to use a retractor or a cutter for removal of those membranes, but they are required to be managed for visual gain. As I said in the beginning also, and I'm re-emphasizing, control of inflammation is must at every step. Before surgery, during surgery, you should not induce inflammation, and post-operative, you should manage it very effectively. And here I would say that we should not have a kind of approach in which we are just goody-goody kind of thing, that we don't want to use more steroids. You need to use enough steroids or anti-inflammatory agents, may require immunomodulating therapy with the like methotrexate or some other azathioprine etc. So, but you need to manage this inflammation, and it should be done from the day one itself. And there are patients to whom we do routine cataract surgery, we see on the day one, and I see them after 3 weeks. But in uveitic patients, I keep at least first day, second day, there is a must. Because if second day patient is not much better than from the first day, you may require to step up your treatment. You may require to give more topical drops, maybe more frequency, maybe more potent. And here I would like to say the difluprednate is a big magic in uveitic patients. The dexamethasone, prednisolone may not be of sufficient help, but difluprednate is a big help in uveitic patients in post-op periods. And the macular edema, if it is there, should be managed. And because of this, many people are being put on NSAID also along with the cataract surgery for a longer period in uveitic patients. For routine patients, I am not using NSAID for post-op period, but for uveitic patients, we are using them to reduce the use of steroids later on. And if it is not controlled, then you may require to give intravitreal or posterior septinans or systemic therapy of steroids. This again is a very controversial thing, and it may vary according to the situations. But what are the more important or most important prognostic factors in the uveitic patients? Bend-shaped keratopathy, as you all know, happens only when there is a chronicity of the disease. And usually it happens when the disease started at an early age. So bend-shaped keratopathy, because of this, gives a kind of prognosis that the patient may be having some other issues or some other problems in the posterior segment, and the vision may not be good. Glaucoma, you all know itself alone is enough, and when it is associated with inflammation, there may be having bad prognosis. Presence of cells in the anterior chamber, which you can see easily in all uveitic patients, is having importance, and presence of posterior synegia. Here the presence of posterior synegia is of least prognosis importance, because the synegia can be released, or synegia can happen only because it was not managed effectively for few days, and later on the uveitis was well controlled. So before having any other problem in the posterior segment, the synegia developed. So synegia itself is not a big thing. But when we are doing for surgery, if cells are already there before surgery, they will have a bad prognosis for simple reason, because it means eye is not quiet, and when eye is not quiet, you will have much more problems in visual recovery, or at the end it may not recover well, because this inflammation may not be controlled later on in an effective manner. There are trials which is there, and the people have found in which the study is done by San Echan, and the outcomes in uveitic patients, the outcome is not very bad, outcome is good, but it is not like a normal cataracts in which we say almost everybody recovers complete vision. But in uveitic patients, when you take care, you manage preoperative, intraoperatively and postoperatively with the treatment, particularly the therapy to control inflammation, the visual recovery is good. And we need to understand that these patients are not normal, so the counseling takes more time. The prognosis should be explained in detail. There should be a note made of it that the counseling is done particularly for the vision separately other than the disease treatment part, and the disease may require repeated treatment or a long treatment. That should also be made a note into a counseling part. Good control of inflammation during full course of treatment is a must, and you should use whatever is required during surgery. As I said, you may require hooks only, you may require devices to dilate pupil, the rings, you may require good viscoelastics, and you may require steroids. So these kind of things should be used in an effective manner and judicious manner. Whenever you do a phaco, preferably keep a low parameter phaco, means the fluidics itself should be so that it should not cause flutter of the iris too much, and it should not induce inflammation too much. Meticulous irrigation aspiration for complete removal of the cortical matter is a must to prevent very exaggerated response because of the lens matter itself. Follow-ups are unlimited, we can't say number, and what are complaints related with the glaucoma, retina or cornea need to have a co-management to achieve a good result. And again, I will say, I have not mentioned here in written, but dry eye is also very common because of the treatment itself, so that should be given a due importance. Thank you, Satyajit, for the opportunity.
Thank you so much.
Hello.
Hello.
So thank you, sir. Very nice seminar. So can I get the questions now? I think I have already one question right now. Sir, how do you manage in cases of uncontrolled diabetes?
Uncontrolled
Uveitic cataract. Yeah.
uncontrolled diabetes need to be managed well, because the uveitic patient, if diabetes is not controlled, because of that only, the inflammation is much more severe than in a controlled case. So the diabetes need to be controlled before surgery. That is a kind of must. And you should be having a check, because sometimes you are giving steroids, oral steroids or systemic steroids. So the diabetes is getting uncontrolled, though it was controlled before surgery. But the moment you start her on or she on these steroids, the steroids will cause a poor control, or moderate control will fail of diabetes. So diabetes need to be mentioned. And if your inflammation is not coming control, you should again check for diabetes. Sometimes the patient was not having a diabetes preoperatively, undiagnosed, but the moment steroids were given, the diabetes got precipitated.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Just 1 minute. I think I have another question now. Does anyone have any other question? Because I'm not getting any more questions in the chat box.
There is one question of fuchs iridocyclitis.
Yeah. In fuchs iridocyclitis, catheter surgery is not very difficult, and usually the catheters are not very advanced also. The only issue is that the fuchs iridocyclitis, some patients develop hemorrhage the moment you enter into the anterior chamber, just by the first primary nick of the side port or main port. The moment you open, hypotonic causes the leakage from the vessels. Though it is not very big one, but the moment you inject air or viscoelastics, that hemorrhage can be controlled. So that is the issue.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So now for coming for the postgraduate, see, for this one topic itself, there are like you get at least around 4 to 5 questions, which is like very important for your exam from an exam point of view. One, this management of cataract in your uveitis itself is a important question. Second, you might get is like the intraoperative complications, what you can get. Like, like your small pupil management or your pupil expansion devices. This itself is like a separate question itself. Third, even like subluxation of cataract. See, any question, if you're getting it, one, you have to make it into like a points and put it, the definition, the factors, what is the mechanism, what is happening, and how you're going to treat about it. Last, even in this topic, even post-op CME. So the cystoid macular edema also is a very important question, which is dealt here. So all these 3-4 questions are all important for a postgraduate, even for your theory point of view, even in your practical point of view. So keep in mind, so all these important questions which you will need to make a note for your exams. Okay. So next, I'll not take much time. We'll go into the second topic, that is a viscoelastic taken by Dr. H.M. Ravindranath. So he's alumni of AIMS with a gold medal, and he's a specialist in squint and glaucoma. He's been the scientific committee chairman of Karnataka Ophthalmic Society. He's been an editor of the Journal of KOS also. He's a director of Drishti Eye Clinic Davangere. He's my teacher, my mentor. He's the person who's taught me how to even start with an incision of cataract. So over to you, sir.
Thank you, Shamant, for being so generous. Can you see my screen?
Yes, sir. I'm able to see.
Okay, I'm audible now.
Yes, sir.
Okay. At the outset, thank you, Satyajit Sinha, for giving this opportunity to share some of my thoughts. I think postgraduates now brain is inflamed because of the inflammatory talk of Dr. Virendra Agarwal. He very nicely has covered almost everything about cataract surgery in uveitis. I think now it is quite in your this thing. I'll start with a very simple topic. As Saman said, you get probably a main question as viscoelastics in cataract surgery uses. And you can also get a short note individual viscoelastics like HPMC, sodium hyaluronate, chondroitin sulfate, those kind of things. Not a very difficult thing to understand and a very simple topic, and I'll try to keep it much more simple. as Dr. Virendra Agarwal sir said, it's a device. No more it's just viscoelastic. It's an ocular viscoelastic device. Why it is device? You have just seen in one of the videos. He showed how beautifully it dilated. It almost worked like a iris hook. So it dilated so well. So now it is an instrument. Viscoelastic itself is an instrument. Okay, and the true why it's called viscoelastic? You divide the word is a viscous and elastic. The two words which are part of the viscoelastic. History dates back to Endre Balas, a Hungarian chemist who extracted hyaluronic acid for the first time from rooster combs in 1972. Till then, can you believe what were the substances used as a replacement of aqueous? It was BSS and air. After 1972, he advocated in actually orthosurgeries and in ophthalmic surgeries also they started using it. Sodium hyaluronate as a with a commercially available product as Helon, which was manufactured by Pharmacia. It was the first commercially available OVD. It was 1980 and it got FDA approved soon. What is an ideal viscoelastic? As ideal thing doesn't exist, ideal viscoelastic till now also doesn't exist. But what do you expect from an ideal viscoelastic? Ease of infusion. It should be easily introduced in the anterior chamber, number one. Second, retention under positive pressure in the eye. See, BSS and air, they don't retain in the anterior chamber, and especially if you have an upthrust, you try to push the air, it doesn't stay. If you put a high molecular weight viscoelastic or a cohesive viscoelastic there, definitely it is retained. So retention under positive pressure in the eye is one of the good characteristics of viscoelastic. Retention during phacoemulsification. Easy removal or no removal needed. Doesn't interfere with instrument or IOL placement. One of the important factors, especially with respect to cataract surgery, is should protect the corneal endothelium and should not obstruct the aqueous outflow. Many of the viscose cause raised IOP after surgery if you don't remove it, and should be non-toxic. So these are the ideal viscoelastic characteristics. Nowadays, with the advancements, we are getting good viscoelastics in the market, almost reaching the goal of an ideal viscoelastic. What are the rheological properties of a viscoelastic? As name suggests, viscosity and elasticity are the two important topics to be understood, and pseudoplasticity and surface tension. Let us come to viscosity. Viscosity it refers to solutions' resistance to the flow. High viscous, more resistance; less viscous, less resistance. Viscosity depends on the molecular weight of the product, and the viscosity is measured in terms of centipoise. Elasticity is the ability of a solution to return to its original shape after being stressed. And this elasticity allows the anterior chamber to reform after the deformation by depression on the cornea when the forces are released. So this is elasticity. So one of the important characteristic of a good viscoelastic is pseudoplasticity. This refers to the solution's ability to transform when under pressure from a gel-like substance to the more like a liquid substance. For example, you must have seen a Helon or sodium hyaluronate or HPMC. HPMC is less viscous. Helon is more viscous, sodium hyaluronate. But if you see the cannula which is used, you need a wide bore cannula for HPMC, but you need a smaller bore cannula for the sodium hyaluronate. That's Helon. Why? Though it is a highly viscous, it has got high pseudoplasticity. So if you have a high pseudoplasticity, it is easy to inject into the anterior chamber even with the smaller bore cannula. So this is pseudoplasticity. What are the commonly used viscoelastics? You can get one of these short notes. You have HPMC, good old. You have sodium hyaluronate and chondroitin sulfate. You have actually a combination of the viscoelastics nowadays in market available. These HPMC, sodium hyaluronate and chondroitin sulfate, these are the three important viscoelastics which are used in market now. Sodium hyaluronate is a biopolymer, a disaccharide. It is component of connective tissue of all the animals, having half-life of 1 day, and it is a cohesive viscoelastic. HPMC is of plant origin. It is not seen in animal. It's not an animal origin product. Easily available at affordable cost. And at least in developing countries, at least in India, it is the most commonly used viscoelastic. Probably sodium hyaluronate is more commonly used in west part, but definitely we are using more and more sodium hyaluronate and chondroitin sulfate nowadays. But still, most commonly used visco in our country is HPMC. It can be stored at room temperature, and it does withstand the autoclave, and is a dispersive OVD. Sodium hyaluronate is a cohesive OVD. Hydroxypropyl methyl cellulose is a dispersive OVD. So chondroitin sulfate is again a mucopolysaccharide obtained from Shin's cartilage of shark fin. And the important property of chondroitin sulfate is it coats the corneal endothelium and it protects the corneal endothelium while doing phacosurgery. But the problem is it's a poor space maintainer. That's why in my future slide, I'll show how it can be combined with the space maintainer to give a good surgical outcome. So in nutshell, you classify OVDs into cohesive OVDs and dispersive OVDs. That is high viscosity cohesive OVDs, low viscosity dispersive OVDs. And viscoadaptive OVDs is a new terminology and a new thing which has come in last 5 to 10 years. But earlier we had only cohesive, high viscosity, dispersive, low viscosity. So high viscosity cohesive, major component of this viscoelastic is sodium hyaluronate. Low viscosity dispersive OVD, major component is HPMC and chondroitin sulfate. Viscoadaptive OVD is a high molecular weight, heavier viscoelastic, like Helon 5 is the typical viscoadaptive OVD. So this diagram beautifully shows how dispersive OVD is short chains, cohesive OVD with the longer chains, and viscoadaptive OVD, increasing viscosity and cohesion. So this is the first one is a cohesive. It's like it stays, it retains its shape. A dispersive OVD here, it spreads. So what are the main differences between cohesive and dispersive? Cohesive having a high viscosity, dispersive having low viscosity. They have longer chain in molecules in comparison to dispersive, which have a shorter chain molecules. Cohesives adhere themselves to the intramolecular bonds, resist the breaking apart, where they adhere well to the external surfaces, which dispersive OVDs. And cohesive OVDs have high degree of pseudoplasticity, and dispersive OVDs have less degree of pseudoplasticity. Okay. Now, if you see here the spectrum of viscoelastics, you have a ability of coat and protect is high with dispersive and less with cohesive, but to retain the shape, to maintain the shape, it is more with the cohesive compared to dispersive. So we have a variety of combo OVDs available to have the advantage of both dispersive and cohesive OVD. Okay. Now, viscoadaptive, as I said, is a new terminology where Helon 5 is an example where meaning that it can have both dispersive and cohesive, depends on the circumstances. Example, during high flow phacoemulsification, turbulence is more, then is in the anterior chamber Helon 5, it behaves like a dispersive OVD. But when anterior chamber is less turbulent, it behaves like a cohesive OVD. So, and maintains the shape, space there. So these are the viscoadaptive OVD. The typical example is Helon 5 from Johnson & Johnson. So I limit myself to cataract surgery, though OVD is used in glaucoma surgeries, nowadays retina surgeries, so many ophthalmic surgeries. But I restrict myself to the cataract surgery. If you take the steps of cataract surgery, the first is capsulorhexis. You need a cohesive OVD because it has to maintain the deep anterior chamber. For phacoemulsification, you need a dispersive OVD because eye should be, it has to coat. The corneal endothelium should be protected during the phacoemulsification. While rooming cortex, you need a dispersive OVD. Open the bag and insertive IOL because it has to maintain the deep anterior chamber and inflate the bag and maintains the bag. You need a cohesive OVD. And while removing OVD, you need a cohesive. But the problem is, cohesive OVD is removed quickly, but it's not easily because it comes as a bolus. But dispersive OVD, it is not seen coming out. So you may end up, if you don't give sufficient time in irrigation aspiration, you may end up in retaining some of the visco which is not seen. Next day, you see a raised IOP. In special cases, like you have a compromised cornea, you need a dispersive OVD, especially this chondroitin sulfate. Viscot is a typical example. We have Discovisc and Viscot available with a chondroitin sulfate and sodium hyaluronate. A shallow anterior chamber, you need a very good cohesive OVD to maintain the deep anterior chamber. Small pupils, like sir showed in uveitic cataract, and you have floppy irises, you need a cohesive OVD. Dense cataract, you need to protect the corneal endothelium, you need a dispersive OVD. And in very small pupils without inflammation, you can use a Helon 5 to mechanically dilate the pupil. One of the short notes also you can get, one of the important terminology, one of the techniques is soft shell technique. You must have heard soft shell technique. See, soft shell technique is one way where you use both a dispersive OVD and a cohesive OVD in combination. What you do is you initially inject a dispersive OVD to coat the corneal endothelium. Then to maintain the space in between the dispersive OVD and the anterior capsule, you inject a cohesive OVD. This is Arshinov has described this as soft shell technique. There's one more terminology called ultimate soft shell technique, where one more cleavage is used here. Again, the first step is same. Viscot is used to protect the corneal endothelium. Here, instead of cohesive, you just put a viscoadaptive viscoelastic. Then at the bottom, you can stain with a blue, or you can even put a balanced salt solution. Complications, just to highlight 3 important complications of viscoelastic. Post-operative raised IOP is one of the important factors. If you have used a dispersive OVD, if you have not completely removed, number one, or if you have used a cohesive OVD, sometimes if you don't remove it, it is more dangerous than even dispersive OVD. Capsular block syndrome, where the visco is trapped behind the IOL in the bag, it can inflate the bag next day and cause a shallow anterior chamber, myopic shift, and raised intraocular pressure. These can be relieved by just a capsulotomy. And post-operative uveitis, especially you see with HPMC, because HPMC, because of its a plant origin, sometimes you get some impurities compared to the HPMC, compared to sodium hyaluronate and chondroitin sulfate. So if you have some impurities left in there, you can have post-operative uveitis. These are some of the commonly used by me, the APA-Visc PFS, Oravisc and Helon, and this Viscot, commonly used viscoelastics. When we were postgraduates, we had only one viscoelastic, which was Visilon. We had 5 ml bottle. We used to waste 2 ml in while putting in the syringe. Ultimately, we used to get 3 ml. That was the only visco which was available. Helon was a diamond for us. If somebody had collected 2 Helons in the rack, he is a very rich person. It was very expensive, which was used only by our professor and head. Nowadays, you have Indian brands available with sodium hyaluronate and chondroitin sulfate, which are very good, affordable cost. So these are in a nutshell about the viscoelastics. Only thing is, you should know what are the 3 important available visco: HPMC, sodium hyaluronate, and chondroitin sulfate, and the combinations available depending on the circumstances. And you should know which cases you should use dispersive OVD, which circumstances you should use a cohesive OVD, and in which conditions you can use a combination of these, and special situations where you have a small pupil and other things, and like floppy iris syndrome. Other things which in practical experiences, I use viscoelastic HPMC over the cornea before I do a capsular access, because it increases the depth perception, and it increases the clarity, improves the glow, and you don't have to put BSS in between, so it disturbs you. So if you put a good amount of HPMC over the cornea before capsular access, definitely it improves your capsular access results. One. Second, whenever you have come across a rent in posterior capsule, definitely you can use a good cohesive OVD there. You can plug, and it forms a barrier between vitreous and anterior chamber, and you can continue with the surgery, irrigation, aspiration, or whatever, and complete the procedure. So these are some of the uses of viscoelastic other than what I said. You can get a short note or long question about viscoelastic, and in practice also you should be using these viscoelastics judiciously. Once again, I think I try to make it simple, made it simple. Once again, I thank Dr. Satish Sinha, who had just finished his MS when I had just joined faculty in Davangere, and now also after 20 years, at least once in a month, all the PGs in Davangere, they remember Satyajit for his contribution to the college. Thank you, and thank you, Shamant, for kind words.
A very nice presentation. I think you explained it under all the possible headings what a postgraduate can get it if it is a 10-mark question. So how we define it, what are the characteristics, what we see, the types, the uses, and even like the complications. I do have a question, actually, one. So if at all you end up getting TAS, like your toxic anterior syndrome, how will you differentiate it from early end of? Hello?
We have lost him. Until he comes back, we can go ahead and you can introduce Dr. Kumar Doctor.
Yeah. So for the postgraduates, OVD, it's itself is a question. So again, you have to write it under how do you define it? What are the characteristics? What you see in ideal? What do you want in an ideal visco? The uses, different scenarios. I think Ravindranath sir has explained very beautifully according to each, giving an example. Then the complications also associated. So it itself is a question. So, and even in a practical use for your cataract surgery. So it's a very important question. Now we'll just move to the next topic, and we can take questions for Dr. HM in the next time. So I'll start with Dr. Kumar Doctor right now. So sir has been a scientific committee member of the EIS for past already for more than 6 years. He is a recipient of the Daljit Singh Gold Medal Award from the previous Chief Minister of Maharashtra, Mr. Vilas Rao Deshmukh. Sir has even been the earliest person to do Presby Classic in pseudophakic patients with brilliant results. So sir will be speaking to us about fluidics in phaco. So it's a very important topic, the bread and butter for cataract surgeons to understand phaco. So over to you, sir.
Good evening to you all. Can you see the slide?
Yes.
Yes. First of all, I'd like to thank Dr. Shetty and Satyajit Sinha. I think it's a fantastic initiative. I've seen your program for 4 days, very well compiled, and I'm sure the postgraduates will benefit. So I'm going to talk on fluidics, and I'm going to only give practical tips as to how it really works and what are the benefits of understanding the whole system. No financial interest. But I'd like to ask one question. How does fluid enter the eye during phacoemulsification? Is it by increasing the aspiration flow rate? Is it by increasing the vacuum? Or is it by height of the bottle and a BSS compression, or none of the above? So if you can answer this question, then it will be nice. But I don't know how many of you are really answering this. But the point here is, don't forget that whatever is entering the system is basically with the height of the bottle. So the answer is 3. That's the height of the bottle determines with gravity how much fluid is actually entering the eye. And in some systems, it's the compression of the BSS which actually determines the amount of flow that is entering the eye. So let's understand surge. Yes?
We are on the slide 1 only.
Okay.
Origin.
Now?
It's not coming full screen.
So let me, is it working this way?
It is working, yes.
Okay, let it work this way. So let's understand surge. I'll try to do it full screen. If it doesn't work, then I'll go back to the original. Is it there?
No.
No. So better let it be this. Now it's there?
No.
Can you see surge?
Yes. Surge number 4, origin from.
Yes, yes. Okay. So I'm going to keep it this half screen. Let us continue this. Now, what is actually surge in fluidics? It originates in the 15th century. It's a noun. It comes from the old French word called surgion. And if you look at verb part of it, it's surge. And in Latin, it basically means rise and fall of waves or swell with a great force. Basically is called surge. So by definition, there is a sudden powerful forward or an upward movement, especially by any force of nature or a tide, is either cause flooding caused by tidal surges, sudden increase in sales is called 20% surge in sales. So you can define it whichever other way you want. So this is how the waves are. You can see that if there's a sudden surge, this is what's going to happen. Let's look at eye, ophthalmology, phacoemulsification and fluidics. So fluidics is basically inflow and outflow of fluid. Now the inflow depends, as I mentioned, on bottle height, the size of the tubing, the sleeve that is there on the phaco tip, and the outflow depends on the pump system, either venturi or peristaltic, the size of the probe and the tubing, that's the vacuum, and the wound leak or the leakage that happens at the level of the wound. And these actually determines fluidics. Very, very important for postgraduate, wherever you're doing surgery, note the position of the irrigating port on the sleeve, which has to be on the two sides of the phaco tip. So you can see this is the irrigating port, this is the phaco tip. It has to be on the side. Make sure that this irrigating port is not on the top, because when the fluid comes out through this port, it comes from two sides. Okay, so if it is bevel up port, you have to be on the side. So whether it's bevel down or bevel up, make sure that the irrigating port is on the side. Same thing is very important setting as far as irrigation aspiration goes. This is the aspirating port and this is the irrigating port. So the two irrigating ports have to be on the side of the aspirating port. Remember this is a very important setting before you start your phacoemulsification procedure. So what happens in surge in fluidics? So once occlusion breaks, there is still a persistent high pressure gradient between. So let's imagine that there's a piece of nucleus at the tip. I'm going to show you a video, and the nucleus disappears. Now the phaco handpiece does not know that the nucleus has disappeared, so it will continue to pull out fluid. So temporarily there is a high pressure gradient difference between the aspiration line and the anterior chamber when uncontrolled amount of fluid is aspirated, which causes a sudden collapse in the anterior chamber, and this is called surge. So the volume of fluid that flows out of the eye into the aspiration line under this condition is called surge. Remember that this is not an issue in modern technology. So surge in phaco, again, beyond the limit, the AC collapses. Now, when the AC collapses, you can imagine, friends, what can happen. Okay, you can pull out the iris, you can have bleeding happening, you can damage the endothelium, the posterior capsule can come up and you have a PC rent. So these are the complications of surge. So most important, inflow should be equal to outflow. Inflow comes with gravity or pressure fed, and outflow comes from aspiration and wound leak. Remember, wound leak plays a very important role as far as fluidics is concerned. For a given bottle height of inflow, there is a constant leakage, and this has been calculated by each technology. Variable parameters are left in the equation of flow rate, aspiration, flow rate, and vacuum. So there are only two variables. As I mentioned, the bottle height will determine the amount of fluid entering the eye. The next two variables is the aspiration, flow rate, and the vacuum, and that determines the outflow by aspiration. So this balance is fluidics as far as phacoemulsification goes. So you can see this, you'll see something happening at the level. So you can see the phaco tip, okay? Watch the eye, and you saw that sudden collapse in this area. And this collapse, you can imagine what's happened to the endothelium, and then the fluid comes back. So that was basically surge. I'm going to show you something more. It's basically compliance of the machine, vacuum level in the aspiration line, diameter and the material of the aspiration line. So the aspiration line, which is actually the tubing which gets attached to the phaco probe, previously used to have large diameters, now and non-collapsible tubing. So it has to be a good level of plastic, good quality of plastic. And do not forget wound, because the wound itself can cause a problem. Let's watch one more video. Everything is going okay? The videos are fine? So watch this in slow motion. Very good. Now see the last piece disappearing and see what happened. This patient is going to be very happy. He's never going to need a yak capsulotomy because the patient's got a rent, beautiful PC rent right in the center. But you can see that when the last piece disappears, the PC comes up, touches your phaco tip, causes a rent and falls back. And this is a classical surge. Okay, so there's nothing left to imagination, but this is what actually happens. So understanding surge, don't forget wound. So the main incision, if it is too tight, the fluid entering the eye will be less. If it is too large, there'll be a wound leak and the anterior chamber will collapse. Don't forget the side port is also a wound. Normally people forget to talk about the side port, but the side port itself is too large. It can cause a leak and you can have an anterior chamber collapse. So it's very important to decide what wound size is necessary for each technology. So I'm going to show you another video where two incisions are being made together. So you can see the side port is an MVR needle. The main incision is a 2.2 keratome, and I'm making both the incisions together. Now the MVR measures 0.75 millimeters. So the side port, if it is more, you don't need a bigger side port than 0.75 millimeter. The main wound can be 2.2, 1.8, 2.8, whatever it is. But this balance is very, very important. Now, each technology, if you buy any technology today, remember one thing, that there is a suggestion given by the technology. So let's look at Alcon, Zeiss, or Johnson & Johnson. They all make phaco machines. They will suggest that for my phaco machine with this sleeve and this size, the wound size should be so and so. So they will tell you make a wound of 2.2 or 2.8. Why? Because they've already understood the fluidics. They'll adjust the bottle height to 105 centimeter. So much fluid is entering the eye. With a size of 2.2 wound, so much fluid is getting out of the eye, and a 0.75 side port, so much of fluid is leaking from there. So the side port has to be made with an MVR. Don't try any other instrument, because anything else you try, you'll have not a calculated side port. And fluidics has been calculated. So in fact, some technologies will also tell you if you're making a stainless steel incision, make it of 2.8. If you're making a diamond incision, make it of 2.7 or 2.6. So they are that specific. Let's go ahead. Flowability. So when we are doing phacoemulsification, a piece of the nucleus is lying in the AC at 6 o'clock and it does not come to you. Okay? It's not coming. Then what you have to do is increase the aspiration flow rate. Very simple. If a piece does not come to the phaco tip, then the next question is, if we are applying phacoemulsification power to the nucleus gets eaten up and gets thrown back at 6 o'clock, then again it comes back, again it gets thrown back. That means the nucleus is not staying at the phaco tip and is bouncing back. If that happens, increase the vacuum, and that is the reason why the nucleus piece will remain at the tip. And that's what adjustment you have to do. So you have to increase the flow rate to bring the nucleus to your phaco tip. You have to increase the vacuum to keep the nucleus at the phaco tip. And you have to increase the bottle height for more fluid entering into the eye. So these are basics as far as fluidics is concerned. Surgeon's control of surge, very important. Increase, as I said, the bottle height. Some people put an AC maintainer. Some people use different viscoelastic. You heard about viscoelastic. So you have methyl cellulose, Helon, Helon GV, Viscoat. It occupies a space in the anterior chamber. Itself will help you maintain the anterior chamber. And that's the reason why it does not flow out very easily. So there are different reasons why it is used. Now, as far as technology goes, today's world, I have not seen surge. I'll show you some videos. In a peristaltic pump, you can have high vacuum settings, high flow rate, and you will not have any surge at all. And venting is what? It means the machine has a sensor. This is today's technology, where machine will know that the nucleus is about to disappear from the phaco tip. It knows that the nucleus has disappeared, the occlusion has broken. Instead of sucking the fluid out, it releases some fluid or air into the AC back. So depending on the venting system, whether it's peristaltic or venturi, it can push air or some fluid back into the anterior chamber. That prevents that sudden surge that is going to happen. And these are normally in V-expandable tubings. This prevents fluid from drying out of the AC, and that's the reason why surge can be prevented. Wound issues, don't forget, too large a wound. Let's assume you want a 2.2 wound. By mistake, you make a 2.8 wound, and you still want to do phacoemulsification. Then you're having more leak coming out from the wound. That will cause AC chamber collapse, and that will cause a surge. So in such a case, you can hydrate the wound and then continue to use the same wound. But instead of 2.2, by mistake, you make a 4 millimeter wound. Then mind you, friends, you can't use the same wound. You have to take a stitch and then make another wound of 2.2 and start surgery from that level. If the wound is too tight, what happens? Very simple to understand, friends. The fluid going through the gravity, through the bottle is less. And that's the reason why you will have surge, because there's not enough fluid entering. where the fluid going out through the aspiration, the vacuum is more. If it is too tight, you can have a Orlock phenomena, so your phaco probe will not move around. It's very easy. You feel that the movement is very tight, enlarge the wound, and this prevents wound burns at the same time. So I'm going to show you a wound leak. Let's look at the wound leak. So you can see this. Now see the amount of fluid coming out. There is a chemosis happening all around. Now this is too big a wound, and this is dangerous. But with experience, some surgeons would get away. But in such a case scenario, it may be wise that you take a suture and then see if it is possible to go ahead and do that. One more question I'll show you of a very tight wound. You can see that the phaco probe will not move very easily in the anterior chamber because this wound is very, very tight. And you can see it's like a oar lock phenomena. It's like a oar getting locked. So in this case scenarios, it might be wiser that you come out, and this is actually going to not allow enough fluid to enter the eye, okay? Because there is a compression happening at the level of the wound. And that's the reason why a tight wound can also cause wound burns in older technology, not seen recently because of cold phacoemulsification. But here you can see that the movement is very, very slow. In such a case scenario, it may be wise to make the wound, as you can see, a little larger, what is necessary, and then go ahead and do phacoemulsification, and you will have a smooth movement, no AC collapse, etc. So this was an example of a very, very tight wound. So to control surge in fluidics, venting is very, very important. So it maintains an anti-collapse system. Either you can throw fluid back or air back, depending on what you have, and that will help you to prevent surge completely. So control surge, important factors is surgeon control. Decrease the flow rate, that is your aspiration flow rate, okay? If you are still getting surge, increase the bottle height, okay? If there is still surge, then decrease the vacuum. Use a AC maintainer. If it still continues, that means something is wrong with your wound. A proper wound construction is essential. You can use good viscoelastics as mentioned in the previous talk, something like Viscoat, which will occupy the anterior chamber, no financial interest. And of course, if anything gets caught, release the foot switch and you will have no problem. So there are machine technologies which are old, which is the Alcon there, and now they have the new Centurion, which actually compresses the BSS and makes sure that the fluid enters at the same time. Johnson & Johnson has got something called a Signature Pro of Fusion Fluidics. I'll go a little bit into that, where it's very important. They have something called as case settings. It's very easy to understand this. It's called an anti-surge algorithm. It basically reduces vacuum by reversing the pump. Once the phaco is applied to the nucleus disappears. At the same time, the machine recognizes that the nucleus has disappeared. It wants to maintain the pressure both sides equally, and that's the reason why it reverses the pump, and this happens in a few milliseconds. So Fusion Fluidics recognizes post-occlusion surge, and that's the reason why it proactively adjusts the vacuum. So it adjusts the vacuum. So let's presume that I'm doing a surgery at a vacuum of 550. I have a nucleus piece at the tip of phacoemulsification, and the nucleus disappears. Technically, the vacuum will suddenly drop to 0, but in the setting of my machine, from 550, it drops to 375, it drops to 125, and then it drops to 0. So this gradual drop is called case, and that's the reason why you do not see surge in modern technology. Same thing you will see in Stellaris. They have a venting system, which is Venturi. So there are different systems that are there. But basically, one air pump was invented many years back by Dr. Amar Agarwal, where you can see that there are two tubings. There is an external air pump with a filter, which actually pushes the air into the anterior chamber, actually pushes the fluid into the anterior chamber. The air is above the fluid, and this maintains the pressure in the anterior chamber. This is no longer necessary. This was in the 90s, but this you will not see in modern technology. So again, use of a standard pump. If necessary, it used to be there. It had its own filter. This actually made sure that the amount of fluid coming out was compensated for surge. The posterior capsule is pushed back, and that's the reason why you don't have a PC dent. And this phenomena of surge is neutralized by preventing the more amount of fluid entering the eye. So now I'll just show you two small videos, and here I want you to watch. Let me see if I can enlarge this. Is this okay? You can see the screen?
Yes, we can see this.
Okay. So here I'm going to take it forward straight to phacoemulsification. You have three settings here: aspiration, vacuum, and power. Okay. So now let's watch here. There is nothing happening at the tip. You can see that there is no nucleus at the tip at all. Okay. And my settings, you can see, of the vacuum on the left hand side is 550. My flow rate is adjusted at 40. But you see what is written below 550 is 375. So when vacuum breaks, what actually happens is the vacuum doesn't drop to 0, it drops to 375. This is patented by Johnson & Johnson. Now let's look at what's happening at the eye level. Look at the vacuum setting. It's here 550. Here the flow rate is 40. So now you can see the flow rate is 40. And now you will see that I bury the tip inside and the vacuum will slowly build. Frozen. Now it's playing. Is it playing?
No, sir.
No. Now it's playing.
Now it's playing.
Now I can't forward it. So then let me go to the next slide. I'll show you there. So to conclude here is that surge is a little bit of history, but you have to control your fluidics with either flow rate, vacuum, or aspiration flow rate. Then it will happen. So let's see if this video plays. And this is quite from the phaco. So I want you to watch these three things. Okay. Now here what I have done, I'll just pause it for a second. My flow rate is 60, as you can see, and I've set my vacuum at 650, which is the highest possible in technology. Okay. Now watch what happens during surgery. Right now you can see that the flow rate is 48. There is nothing at the tip, so the flow rate is good. Vacuum occasionally goes up. Now watch what happens here. I've filled in. There is a complete occlusion. Vacuum is 550. Flow rate is almost 0. I'm holding the nucleus and I'm chopping. So I've chopped again, and now I'm rotating the nucleus. Again, watch the tip very carefully that the flow rate is 60. When I put the tip into the nucleus, the vacuum builds up to 300 or 550, and then I'm holding the nucleus and then I'm chopping. So when the vacuum is 550, the flow rate is 0 and the power is 0. Now watch again. Look at the power, look at the flow rate, look at the vacuum. Now bury the tip inside, vacuum is 550 and flow rate is almost 0, power is 0. So the phaco is being used only when I'm burying the tip inside. So this is called modern fluidics. With case, you hardly see any surge. So at a flow rate of 60, a vacuum of 660, there is no surge. As you can see, the chamber is completely stable. There's nothing volatile about it. The endothelium is far away from your nucleus. Your PC is away. And now you bring each piece into the center. And same way, you can see when the piece is being emulsified, the power is being used, which is set at 40. The flow rate goes according to the tip, whether there is anything there or not. And the vacuum is built up when there is total occlusion. So when there is occlusion, the vacuum goes up, and that is it. So in conclusion, where are the special considerations that you will do for fluidics? In RK-operated patients, you can reduce bottle height. In subluxated cases, you can reduce bottle height. In small pupils, in old generation technology, you can reduce the flow rate and vacuum from the iris coming into your phaco tip. But in modern technology, you really don't need to adjust this. Very high myopes, like where you need to use a lens of -1, -2, whatever possible, and high hyperopes, where the anterior chamber is very, very shallow, you may reduce the bottle height. Posterior polar cases, you may reduce the bottle height in phaco and irrigation aspiration to prevent a certain blowout. I would like to thank Satyajit as well as Dr. Shetty for this opportunity given to me, and this was as far as fluidics is concerned. I'll try to stop sharing.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. It was a very informative talk. I hope, I think the PGs have understood the basics of fluidics and its importance. I think you showed great videos and all the settings and what is the new innovation and the new technology now, how it has changed. So I think that will help them a long way. So we are open to questions.
Which is better, coaxial or bimanual? Is one question I'm reading. Can I answer it?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so see, I have been doing phaco since 1994. That time bimanual was not invented. So I am used to a coaxial 45 degree. It never gets blocked. And to access the sub-incisional is very, very easy. There is nothing wrong with either coaxial or bimanual. Both are brilliant. But make sure that your port of the bimanual IA is 0.75 millimeter. So an MVR is the ideal size for the side port. Do not try to use any of those knives which by mistake you poke it in a little more and you'll have a 1.25 millimeter side port. Then 1.2 millimeter side port itself will become a wound leak and itself will become a headache. So my suggestion would be to use an MVR for a side port. Do bimanual or coaxial, whatever you used to. Both are brilliant techniques and there's nothing to worry. Bimanual, there are many types of bimanuals available in the market, but Oertli makes one of the best ones where the tip is little narrowed down. So you don't need a larger side port to enter. Next question was about Venturi pump or peristaltic. It all depends on what you like. I'm used to peristaltic, but it's like, I personally prefer a peristaltic compared to Venturi because you can, it's like driving a Ferrari with a safety of a Bentley, whatever sense it makes. So you have more airbags, you're protected all over, even if it goes everywhere, nothing is really going to happen. Venturi is very different. You have to have a very high control. And that's the reason why, if you like to saw the settings that I did in the video, the flow rate was 60 and the vacuum was 650. So you can't have a bigger flow rate than this. And yet you did not see any surge. So I personally feel that the peristaltic is a safer system. What is cold phaco? Cold phaco is basically the newer technology where the off time and the on time of the phaco vibration tip that happens is documented. Cold phaco, nowadays, even if you hold the phaco tip in your hand and apply phaco power, it won't burn your tip. So basically, it means that the temperature it is reaching is less than 30 degrees centigrade. Cornea burns at 42 degrees centigrade. And that's the reason why older technology, we could see wound burns. I have not seen a wound burn since 2001. And the reason being, the cold phaco was introduced by then. I don't know how many of you really know. I don't think Satyajit Sinha also knows why is it called cold phaco and why it's got a white star on it. Do you know this?
No, I don't know.
Yes, the reason is the cold phaco was invention of AMO or Elargan or Johnson & Johnson. And the man who invented it was holding a Mobla pen and writing algorithms with it. And he saw that white star on it. Okay. And so he called it white star cold phaco. Okay. Alcon copied it and lost the lawsuit in the US. They had to pay $241 million to Elargan for copying that technology. Basically, it means on time, off time, temperature of the phaco tip doesn't go beyond 30 degrees, and so it does not burn your tip. Why is this? I think one question is there. Why is the sleeve made of silicon? Because I guess it can take the temperature. Anybody wants to ask? Virendra sir is there. Sir, you want to say something?
No, I agree with you all fully. There's a cold phaco or the phaco which has improved over on time, off time, and by reducing temperature. There is another thing which usually used to use machines of 60 kilohertz. Now the machines are around 30 kilohertz or 40 kilohertz. So
Yes.
that also has reduced the temperature rise. And silicon is the reason because it is autoclavable, it is malleable, and it doesn't give any chemical reactions.
Yes.
Yeah.
Satyajit, any other questions?
Another thing is silicon can be in different, you know, I don't know whether you know, as postgraduates, I'll tell you that silicon, the incision size of 2.8 or 2.2 depends on the silicon sleeve. So you have a silicon sleeve for a 19 gauge needle. So don't forget the incision size, the size of the phaco tip is not changing. The diameter of a phaco tip is 0.8 or 0.9 millimeter. What you are changing on it is a silicon sleeve. So the silicon sleeve can be blue, yellow, or violet. Okay? Now, if it is blue, you need a larger incision. If it is yellow, it's more smaller incision. Violet needs a 2.2 or a 1.3 millimeter incision. It basically means that the silicon sleeve is holding on to the phaco tip beautifully, and that's the reason why the same amount of fluid is going through the silicon sleeve. That's more information on the silicon sleeve. to ask anything else?
Yeah, we had, I think, around 2 questions for Dr. H.M. Ravindranath. So he was not there. So one question was like, in case of PCR, what is the type of visco what you use? So actually, immediately when you are having a PCR, you first need to use a dispersive, then followed by a coercive. So dispersive will not allow your vitreous to again come up. So that is one thing. So after that, the coercive is going to help you to maintain it. So that is one thing. Second, question was in case of pediatric cataract. Pediatric cataract, I think we can use coercive. I would want to know the opinion of Dr. Kumar sir and Dr. Agarwal sir. Is there again, would you go for a dispersive there, or I think we can still go ahead with coercive?
So, Virendra, you'll answer or you want?
Yeah, you answer first.
So in pediatric, I like to do a soft cell technique. Okay, so I
Yes.
might combine the two. Problem in pediatric is, as you might know very well, that the anterior capsule behaves very differently. Like a young, it tends to run away. So there you need a lot of pressure, and you may want to make sure that it's sitting there well. And you need that compression in the central 4 or 5 millimeter zone, very, very important. So I might prefer to do a combination. One is to, and they're all soft cataracts,
Perfect.
99%,
Yeah.
99.9%. So I'm not worried about endothelial damage at all. But I'm 100% worried about the rhexis running away, because it's very, very crucial that we don't lose the rhexis. So
Yes.
in a pediatric, you will target for a smaller rhexis and you'll get a 5. Like in an adult, you may target a 5, you may get a 5.5. So that's what I have experienced, and this works very, very well. Virendra, you can answer. Continue.
Yeah, I agree with you fully. The important thing, the rhexis is very, very important in pediatric cataracts, and that is the reason that it should be controlled. The only issue is that when you want to do a rhexis, the chamber should maintain, it should not leak out. So there also it is of a big help, because the dispersive remains there without coming out so easily from a rhexis point of the or micro rhexis forceps. So, and in pediatric case, usually the forceps is required. It is cannot be done by a needle alone in majority of the patient. So dispersive is really very good. You can use soft shell or you can use pure dispersive also.
Yes, sir. And the last was difference between high viscous and a low viscous. What does that mean? Could both of you want to comment on that, sir?
There is a viscosity of the particular material. So the high viscosity will remain there for a more time. The low viscosity will, suppose you are doing phaco
Easier
or you are
to.
doing IA, it will easily get sucked up. So that is the issue. And another thing, Dr. Shetty, I was saying that in case of PCR, you should
Yes,
not
sir.
remove the handpiece as a jerk or suddenly.
Yeah, yeah.
You should
In
start
the other hand,
injecting
we have to put
visco when your handpiece is already inside.
there.
So otherwise, you are right that we should use dispersive first and then you can use cohesive over that.
Yes, sir.
So one additional point I'll add here, excellent everybody, but my thought was, even whether you use dispersive or cohesive, the method to remove is also because the one thing, for example, Obis takes longer time, so you have to actually dilute it in the irrigation. Once it gets diluted, it'll come out. So that's an additional step that care that you have to take.
So we still have 2 more questions right now. Again, difference between hyperpulse and pulse mode.
Virendra?
Yeah, I'm not using hyperpulse mode, but there are few people who use hyperpulse and particularly burst kind. This is called as burst also, in which whenever you actually just hold on. I'm driving back to home. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So whenever you are holding the piece and if you give hyperpulse, that will be advantage that it will be a short amount of phaco delivered. The energy used is less, and at the same time you can achieve what you want to achieve.
Okay, sir.
So I can answer.
Yes, sir.
So as far as burst
So
mode
you
is
required. Hello.
Yeah, Virendra. So as far as the burst mode is concerned, basically it means, just to understand, that suppose I've set the parameters of power at 80. Okay. So burst mode is technically used in very hard cataracts where you made 8 pieces of the cataract and then you get each piece into the anterior chamber and then shift to burst mode. So what happens in burst mode is when you go to level 3, your power begins. So you know that level 1 is irrigation, level 2 is vacuum, level 3 is power. But in burst mode, if you set your power at 80, full 80 gets delivered at one shot to the nucleus. So basically, there's not linear control. You can have panel control, you can have linear control, you can have different settings. But the advantage of burst mode is in very hard cataracts, when the nucleus is at your phaco tip, you can apply full energy. You're away from the endothelium, you're away from the posterior capsule, and this is a safer, faster method of using it. Pulse mode is basically same on time and off time. So the burst mode can be used by some surgeons in hard cataracts. Otherwise, the rest are all normal pulse mode cataracts.
Yes, sir. And the second question was, in case of PCR, why do you do a dry aspiration?
In case of PCR, if you use hydro or the irrigation continuous, it will keep on hydrating vitreous. And you hydrate the vitreous, it will become more bulky and it will keep on prolapsing. So you don't want to hydrate the vitreous much more because it will increase in volume. So that is the first thing. Another thing is that when you use irrigation line, it will have a direction towards the vitreous. So it will go inside and the vitreous will come out. So it is better to do a dry aspiration or do a vitrectomy from pars plana. That is my choice.
Better. Kumar, sir?
Yeah, whatever sir has said is perfect, but most important is dry aspiration because of the hydration of the vitreous. So the vitreous will keep coming out and it will keep coming in your way. So the best thing is what sir said was to go through the pars plana and do a vitrectomy. So I feel today's world, everybody should learn that anterior segment surgeons should have an access to pars plana, and it's not very difficult once you get a little hang of it. There's a question of torsional phaco. So there are two phacos basically in the Alcon system, which is a Centurion. You have a torsional phaco where the phaco tip is actually longitudinal and torsional. So it's like this. And in Johnson & Johnson, it is elliptical and longitudinal. So it's called phaco ellipse FX. So it's like a shape of an egg. So logically speaking, when you are putting a jackhammer into a road, if you're going in a shape of a round oval egg, you are obviously breaking more road at the same time with the same amount of jackhammer effect. So that is as far as two different systems are concerned. And that's the reason why it's called torsional or ellipse FX. Virendra?
Yes, you are correct. It is only explanation. But I agree with you that just by rotating on the same axis, it does not work that much. So it is elliptical is better than torsional.
Yes. Satyajit sir, aap bhi kuch.
What is the difference between trench and chopping?
Bata do.
So, Kapil, trench is when we are using the ultrasound energy in the phaco machine, the act of making that, how do you say, that trench, that tunnel that we make initially in the lens, that is called the trench. But actually, when you are holding the nucleus and you go with the chopper, you go at almost at the equator and then you pull it towards the phaco probe, and then you divide the nucleus. That is called the chopping act. So trench is you want to go on making deeper and deeper until such time that you just about begin to see a red reflex, and even just before that, and then you go and hold the nucleus, and then you take a chopper and then you chop the nucleus. That is called chopping. So we don't have any more questions, and I would like to say a big thank you to everybody. I would like to begin to thank Dr. Virendra Agarwal, who has been like a big brother, a friend, a philosopher and guide, and he has always been there guiding us in Bihar also. He is such a great organizer. In 2017, at a urgent notice, he was asked to organize the All India Conference, and what a superb conference Dr. Virendra Agarwal had organized. He is such a busy practitioner, national and well-known international speaker, and he made time for the postgraduates of Bihar. We are very grateful to you, sir. Thank you so much. I'm very, very grateful to Dr. Kumar, doctor also, who is such a busy practitioner. I must tell you that it took a while for him to figure out the Microsoft meetings. He has been presenting every day on Zoom, but Microsoft meeting was new for him. And even though he's a busy practitioner and he could have just let it go off, he took out 1 hour of his time trying to understand how to figure out these Microsoft meetings, and such is his passion to teach the postgraduates. He has been to Bihar before earlier also to deliver lectures, and we are very, very grateful to him. He is also ophthalmologist to some of the most beautiful actresses in Mumbai, and we are very grateful to him for taking time to teach the postgraduates.
Thank
We are
you.
very grateful to Dr. H.M. Ravindranath, who is faculty at JJMMC Davangere. He's a well-known surgeon over there. Very grateful to him for having taken out time. I'm also very grateful to Dr. Shaman Chetty for taking out time for doing this moderation so well. Thank you so much, Shaman, for doing this so well, so nicely. Thank you so much to
Thank
all.
you, sir. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Kumar sir. Thank you, Agarwal sir. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. And I would also like to thank Manish ji from Intras Pharmaceuticals for bringing this all together. And we will see you tomorrow. Tomorrow we have Dr. Love Kochgabe, who will be speaking on pediatric. We have Dr. Harshul Tuck, who will be talking on management of PCR. All the questions today can be answered tomorrow more in detail. And we have the chairman of the scientific committee of All India Ophthalmic Society, Dr. Partha Biswas, who will be speaking on cataract surgery in victimized eyes. And the moderator for tomorrow will be Dr. Karan Bhatia. So we'll see you all tomorrow at 5 p.m. Thank you so much. Bye and good night.
Thank you, sir. Good night.
Thank you, everyone.